So we've got our two trees in the spot. We understand the triangle tool and how it helps us. Let's take a quick look before we jump into talking about plants and all of that good stuff. And take another look at the resource browser here. That's the resource browser palette. It's usually on the right side of your screen, maybe towards the bottom. Is anybody missing it? We haven't used it much. Okay. This again, we talked a little bit about either the last week or the week before. This is a sort of window into a lot of the attributes or the elements that we have already used in the current drawing that we're in. So it has things like the gradients. These are all of the gradients that have been used. So it's not necessarily things that you would see, but if they had been used in a plant symbol or as the standard or default settings in any of your classes, that gradient will be here. So you'll be able to kind of get to it quickly and reapply it to objects if you wish. Same with hatches. And again, you wouldn't necessarily see these being used already on the plan, but they are within the file. Line types, some of these 3D plant attributes. And then importantly, as we get down towards the bottom, the symbols for the plants that we have already defined, as well as those default plant symbols that we've used to help define those. So I have things like, the Kusa dogwood and oak leaf hydrangea and heuchera and other plant symbols that I have used in previous projects. Again, they came over when we made a copy of the file. We talked about how from here, this is sometimes a nice way of like scrolling down to this area when you're starting your planting plan, because from this window, from this pane, you can simply, if I wanted to plant some pennisetum, I could double click on my pennisetum symbol, it's right there. And just by double clicking on that, I'm automatically clicked into the plant tool. So from there, I could select which type of planting I want to use in my preferences bar. And then I could just start planting pennisetum in this case. So I could select maybe the triangular array mode, which will allow me to plant an area. And maybe I'll just pick this area along the trees.
How will you do that?
Start my pen. No, I'm just kind of showing you, so don't just watch along. Okay. So again, the resource browser can be really helpful when you are starting on a planting plan, particularly when you have a lot of the symbols already defined, I should say. Just because it's related, if you're already in the plant tool, another way, there's two different ways, probably 3 or 4 other ways as well we won't go over, but if you're in the plant tool, another quick way of getting to the plants that again have already been defined is going up to the pull down menu up in the preferences bar here. So when you click on that menu again, those same symbols, the same set of symbols that are here, show up here. And you can again select them from this window and then start planting them as well. Just 2 different quick ways of getting to your symbols. So one thing we didn't talk about last round is that the resource browser not only can show you the information that's already in the file that you're working in, but it can also show you symbols and gradients and other resources that are in other files. So whether that's another file that you've worked on in the past, so maybe you have a project from 2 years ago that had a really great native plant palette that you want to draw from, but it's not in your parent or your current working file. You could find that file and open it up. So here, I happen to have a file already open. So right now, Vectorworks Site B is the site I'm in, or the project I'm in. But I have another file open, Vectorworks Site A, which is the file from the last project. When I select that in the files pull down, that then shows me all of the plans and the resources from that file.
Oh. All right, they should technically be the same, right?
They should technically, yes. This would probably be more effective if it was like a very different. But the concept here is that you can jump back and forth from other files that you've already worked in.
Or if someone sent you one.
Or if somebody sent you one, you could drag stuff from those files as well. So let's say I came in here and I thought, oh, well, I didn't have, what's a good one here? Maybe I haven't used the swamp, or the, let's say, gumbo white azalea. And again, I'm in site A right now, so I could double click on that and start planting those azalea. Whoa, I got this very close together. Give it a second to think. And then I have, ooh, crazy. Now I have those in my current drawing. I've just borrowed them by double clicking on them and using them. Once I've used them in the site B file that we're in, then they are already automatically a part of that file. So if I were to come back to the resource browser, go to File, pull down, and switch back from seeing the resources from site A to site B, my current file, I would find that the gumbo azalea is now in that file as well. Okay. Let me get rid of those terrible plants. So you can see the resources from the current file you're in. You can see all of the resources from another file that's open that you want to take a look at. But it also is the way that you get into the Vectorworks libraries. So if you all want to click on in the resource browser that pull-down menu under Files, and you probably just have one file open right now. It should be the file that you're in, so you probably don't have another file. But you do have Vectorworks libraries. So if you select that, a browser window pops up.
Wait now.
So click on Files.
User libraries
And
or Vectorworks?
Vectorworks libraries.
Cool.
So once you're here, it jumps you by default to where Vectorworks places all of the libraries when you download and install the program.
Mine is way shorter.
So what we have here is just the default libraries that came with Vectorworks. What we don't have are all of the additional landmark and other libraries that you can also download from Vectorworks. So this week, especially if you're in the next series of classes, confirm that you have those libraries on your computer. So if it just says defaults, favorites, and hatches, then you probably don't have the additional libraries. So I'll give you instructions on how to get those, because you can still go back to where you downloaded the file or the program in the first place and download all of the additional optional libraries as well. Those are we talked a little bit about that earlier on in the quarter. Those are going to be huge.
Both landmark and architecture.
So if you want to focus on just the landmark class or libraries, that's fine. But some of the architectural ones are really interesting as well. So
Air plants.
I say just bring them all. It's like a couple gigabytes, I think.
Today I needed a marker stone or
Huh?
something. Which one would the marker stone be?
Marker stone. Oh, like a symbol for?
Yeah.
I don't
All right.
know.
Off the top of your head.
Yeah.
Well,
Honestly,
it's like
I don't know
you
that
can
one.
see less.
Yeah. I mean, you could search through these, and there may be one in there, but yeah, there's no good.
Because you know, on your property, well, you might not. We had that pole thing marked by it.
Oh, yeah, we don't have that. But there may be a symbol in there already for you. Okay, so, but here, essentially what we're looking at, and we'll go look at some of the default files here, is you can select on any of these folders that have additional files within them. We're going to scroll down and just go to the plants folder. And if you click on plants, you'll see that essentially there's a Vectorworks file in there that's titled Basic Template Plants. There are others you'll find when you have the full libraries like Plant Objects and Plant Objects 2 and a couple others that are helpful like pergolas and benches and stones and all these other great little symbols you can work with. But all they are Vectorworks files that have those symbols placed in them.
That
So there's
someone else has drawn by hand, right, at some point?
Yes, so someone created those symbols, right? But they are, don't let libraries fool you. They're really just Vectorworks files, drawings, that have those symbols placed in them. But when you bring them into your resource browser, then you can select from all of those symbols that are within that file. So if we had the Plant Objects 2 file, we could open that up in our resource browser, and you'd find 50 additional plant symbols of varying qualities that you could work with as the sort of starting points for your plant symbols. But if you have them at home, I would suggest this week to kind of play with them, because you can spend a little bit of time kind of going through and seeing all the cool stuff that comes with the Vectorworks libraries after you have them downloaded.
I have a question about Vectorworks libraries and resources. Is that, like, hatches was something I was looking for patios, and they don't indicate what those hatches are. You have to basically bring each one in to find out, and it's just not helpful at all.
So you're saying that you couldn't just sort of open the file
and just see
and
a
then
bunch of
see-
different hatches. Yeah, that's what I wanted to see.
Yeah.
But these are the ones for the patio, or they're like stone stuff. But it
So-
doesn't really show them.
So the resource browser may be an opportunity for you to get a preview of those hatches. So if you were to
Yeah,
go,
that's what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
But
So-
you think it would, if I had looked in the resource browser, maybe I would see it. Okay.
so let me just talk through this. If you go to the files, and like we did before, just go to the Vectorworks libraries, and then in the libraries go to defaults, and there are probably like hardscape, let's see, hatches. So there are hatches here for things like Unilock papers.
Yeah.
If I open that up, it gives you a preview of what each of those hatches
okay.
will look like. So you
Okay.
could sort of shop around a little bit.
Yeah.
And find one that kind of gets to the least graphic flavor you're looking for. Okay. And then one last thing I'll mention is next to files. Well, you can't see it on this screen because it's just off to the edge. But there's this little home button. So sometimes you get pretty deep into the libraries, kind of searching around, finding things. But if you just want a quick way of getting back to the current file, which in this case is the site B, all you have to do, or a quick way of doing it, is just by hitting the home button, and that brings you back to site B, in my case, or to whatever the file is currently. Okay, so that can be really helpful. Next quarter, we'll be spending quite a bit of time in the resource browser, so we'll be pulling a lot of 3D resources from the libraries that are inside Vectorworks or that come with Vectorworks. So we'll get pretty well acquainted with it through the next few weeks. Okay. Okay, so any questions about where we are at this point with this site? Tonight, what I'm going to have you do is kind of not play on your own, but I'm going to talk through to you about landscape areas and how they work and how they don't work, but how you can use them a couple different ways. And then I'm going to kind of let you go to sort of draw some of the landscape areas on your own, and then place some plants, some proposed plants in those areas. And also float around, answer any questions, either lingering small questions or bigger, broader questions that you have from the quarter or just from using the plant tool. So part of this evening will be drawing proposed planting beds. So do we already have a P or an N for proposed or new planting bed class that we've created? So let's go ahead and create that class. We'll right click in the classes navigation palette. And we'll go to new. So go ahead and create a, we're using P or N? For the
Emoji.
P. And then planting bed for the name. I'll click OK. So when we get to the Edit Classes window, go ahead and click on Use at Creation. For the style, this is going to be sort of our default planting bed. So we want to have a little bit of graphic flair to it so it reads as a planting bed rather than as anything else. But we don't want it to be too garish. So let's pick a pattern for the fill. And then style should say pattern. The pattern pull down that comes next to it, let's click on the options there. And a lot of these will be really dense if we were to select some of the ones that like sort of read very dense just in the swatch here. But this guy, sort of the second one down and all the way to the left, will work pretty well for our purposes. It'll just give us sort of a nice little stipple. Right now, the way patterns work is that you can, they're very simple, black and white by default typically when you start, but you can actually define the colors that make up that pattern. So if we wanted to keep the stipple as black, which would be the foreground, but we want to make the background a color, we could do that here. So let's click on the back, which is currently white, and let's pick a green. I'm going to try and pick a non-offensive green. So I'm going to come down here a little bit more, maybe something like that. Now, some of these will be larger areas on our plan, so just like we didn't want the stipple to be too dense, we really don't want the green to read too bright or too strongly either. So one way we can kind of control that, and we'll start here, is by changing the opacity. So again, that will make it clearer. You can actually see through the fill. But what that will do for us is actually lighten out the color quite a bit. So let's start at maybe 50%. Okay, so that's the fill. For the pen, I think we can just keep it solid. Color, black is fine. And then the thickness we'll keep pretty thin, maybe like 0.8, since it's just sort of a soft edge. 0.18, sorry. Good call. That'd be very different. And then again, for the bottom half, that's all 3D stuff, so we will not deal with that this quarter. We will, or for this class, we will the next round of classes though. Okay, so we have that all set up. Let's click OK. All right. So let's talk about the landscape area tool. This is another way, probably the best way of creating or defining planting beds for proposed planting beds. What it will do is it will give you a polygon. It acts very similar to the polygon tool. So if you do a nice closed polygon with multiple sides, it will then, of course, give you things like the area and the perimeter and all that good information. But what it will do, what that polyline doesn't do, well, a couple things, is that it will help you or allow you to graphically change the perimeter line so that it looks kind of squiggly or scratchy, depending on how you like to graphically show a proposed planting bed. And there's a lot of ways you can kind of tweak it to make it, really coarse or really fine. Also, though, for landscape areas, you can define a plant mix. So if you have a large area that you want to have either like all echinacea or maybe a combination of dropseed and echinacea, then you could define that within the planting area or within the landscape area, sorry. So let's step through how we do that real quick. And why don't we all do this together? What we're going to do is we're going to go into the landscape area tool, and then we're going to use it to draw a planting bed that goes along the back of the house. Okay?
Perfect. One is not there yet. Okay.
Well, and if you don't have the back patio drawn or anything like that, just kind of eyeball it in. Don't sweat it. Ooh, squeak. Okay. So the landscape area tool is down in the tool sets. So down in the bottom left corner in this palette. If you're still in the site planning tool sets, which is the little button that has little green trees on it, that's where our plant tool is. Just below it, you should find the landscape area tool. Go ahead and select it. Okay? So, well, actually, real quick, before we go any further, let's make sure we're in the right class. So, we're doing new or proposed planting beds, so go ahead and make sure we're in that class. And also, before we draw anything, let's just ensure that our attribute palette has all of those little arrows pointing back telling you that it will use the class attributes for whatever objects you draw.
Mine doesn't show the colors.
So if it doesn't, it's that little arrow button down at the bottom of the attributes palette. If you click on it, that's where you can define make all attributes by class. It's the third option down. Cool.
So
Mm-hmm.
I made a class to put the flower beds on their own.
Say that again.
I put